Cool. And here is Josh Bell, our wonderful pastor, to talk about our next part of our Idol series.
Thank you, Carla. How many of you were freshmen the last time we met in here regularly? All right, that's a few of you. Yeah. Yeah. Makes me remember seniors too. I remember having senior night here and watching Mason Sanders over here play the djembe for the last time, and Peter and Jeremy DeMoss was actually a senior then too. He's just an Archie major, so he's still here. So thank God for these Archies. They come back. We don't have to lose everybody. I love victory laps. You know, they're more common at state universities where I went. So you like that? It's a new term for you. But we have to find some way to make it honorable. You guys, if you show up even on campus your fifth year, it's like, I'm just on break. I just, flew in to recruit, or something. It's got to be all meaningful. We have 2 more weeks and then it's spring break. Can you believe it? Are you ready? But you've got a lot of work until spring break, don't you? It doesn't feel like spring break yet. It feels like there's a long way till I rest. Okay, so that means 2 more in our Counterfeit God series, and then it's spring break, and then we'll cover Colossians in the second half of the semester. Before we jump in tonight, we're going to be talking about Jonah and the idea of hidden idols. But before we go there, we have to recap a little bit, because some of this stuff just has to be restated. Like what Emily talked about last week, what Eric talked about the week before, just great stuff. Emily talked about Jacob last week and how Jacob came to this point in his life where he tried to find satisfaction in stealing his father's blessing from his brother Esau. And that didn't work out so well for him. He had to run for his life. And then he gets to a new place and he sees Rachel. And he thinks, aha, if I can just get this girl, I will be complete. And yet it doesn't work out that way for him. Emily said this tactfully, but essentially, Jacob is this picture of anybody, maybe even any of us, when we set our mind or our heart on thinking that if I can find that one person that will complete me, just what happened to Jacob is he served 7 years for Rachel, and in his honeymoon he woke up and realized he didn't have Rachel, he had Leah. It's that idea that when you set your heart on one person, thinking this is what I'm made for, this person will complete me, you'll never really be satisfied. You never will. It's not that person's fault. You just weren't made to be completed by another person. And in fact, when we expect another person to complete us, we're putting a burden on them that they shouldn't have to carry. We were all made to know and love God. And when that's where our real love is at, then we can love each other a lot better. We saw that in Jacob's life. And then the week before that, Mingle covered this idea of how we can let success in our career be our counterfeit God. Like our whole identity is wrapped up in that. And there was this idea that we're not really taught to ask, how does my future career or my success benefit others? We only think, well, how much does it pay? Or how does it benefit me? And so Eric challenged us to begin to think differently, and begin to say, how does it affect everybody else, what I do in my life? Just a completely different way of thinking. And that really leads us into tonight's talk. In the book, Counterfeit Gods, which has been a fantastic book for us to work from, written by Tim Keller, there's a portion that starts out talking about a girl named Melissa. And it's taken from the opinion section of the New York Times. I'm going to read part of it to you. It says, a writer in the New York Times Sunday opinion section recently wrote about a friend named Melissa. a 29-year-old who was a vice president at JP Morgan until recently being laid off. While just about everyone is still angry at Wall Street, Melissa doesn't exactly fit the villainous cliche of the greedy trader who's collecting millions in bonus money while her company burns. She was well paid, but very generous with her money towards friends and charitable nonprofits. However, her specialty was securitizing subprime mortgages, student loans, and credit card debt. That all this debt she was putting together like a puzzle and selling to investors would play such a sinister role in the downfall of the economy didn't occur to her, although it probably should have. Why didn't it occur to her? As Nathan Hatch said in chapter 4, our culture does not equip students to ask those questions, ask those kinds of questions about a job. Usually the only question is, what does it pay? In 2009, half of the graduating class at the Harvard Business School, the day before they graduated, they took an unofficial oath. And it basically was boiled down to what Eric asked us to think about 2 weeks ago. That was that when you guys go to graduate and you go to take a job, will you think about how it affects others and not just yourself? When you think that a whole class, or half a class of Harvard Business School graduates would do that, you have to go, wow, what is at play that would make them be so deliberate to push back against that? And it's just this, that there are norms and cultural expectations, or just kind of the way things are, and if not pushed back against, they steer us in the wrong direction. And one of those would be a simple question, which is like, well, I'm going to take the job which makes the most money. And yet, we're looking at, can we ask a better question? How does it affect other people? You see, every culture really has its standards and definitions of success, its norms. A lot of them aren't bad. It's what we do with them. I remember when we first moved to Houston. We lived just a few blocks behind a baseball field, and now because of all you guys, I can walk across campus and see Kyle people everywhere. Back then, I didn't know anybody. So I go to the rec center just to get into a pickup basketball game to try and meet somebody. So I remember one of the first times I ever did that, I met a bunch of Chinese students, and it was like their first few days in the country. And they were trying to figure out cell phone plans and trying to get settled and everything. I was able to kind of jump in, help them figure that out, and I started playing basketball with them regularly. Became friends with one of them. We'd often go eat dim sum together on Saturday morning and play basketball once a week. And this one guy, Chumbo, I just really respected him because he was just young, and well, he was 24, I think, and he was pursuing a PhD in CAM, Computation and Applied Math, and killing it. I'm just like, he's so young, and he's almost got a PhD in CAM, and I'm just like, it might be more normal for you guys, but not for me. I'm like, 24, PhD, like what? You know, in a small town in Texas, we grow up and aspire to play under the Friday Night Lights. You know, like that's a norm for us. It's like, I want to play football. And here's the thing, when I didn't achieve that, basically. When I asked Jumbo, I'm just going to honor this guy because this is kind of cool. I said, Jumbo, you're 24, and you're going to have a PhD pretty soon. He said, this is just what I'm supposed to do. If I don't do this, then there's questions asked. But this is just what I'm supposed to do. This is just normal. I'm not doing anything extra. His PhD was the equivalent of what my bachelor's was supposed to be. You know what I mean? Like, I was supposed to go get a bachelor's, this one, show I was late, do something after high school. And he was supposed to go get a PhD. Whoa, okay. These are just two different standards. Things that were normal for his background, normal for my background. And yet, they all exist. And it's a real question of what do we do with these things? So do these things push us in the right direction? Tonight we look at the life of Jonah. This is one incredible book, and it fits in that category of favorite books for me that are 4 chapters. Like Philippians 4, is it? Philippians 4, Colossians is 4, Jonah is 4. I love it because it's 2 pages, the whole book. That's it right there. That's a book of the Bible. And you can sit down and wrap your mind around the whole flow of the whole thing right there. And if you're just thinking, well, big fish swallowed a dude and he survived, yes, that's the story. But this book is incredible. It's so straightforward. It's very to the point. Well, I'm going to show you. We're just going to take a look at it. There were cultural norms for Jonah, things that he went along with, and he allowed to push him in a certain direction. But first, before we get to what that is, let's just look at his story. The book of Jonah begins really with God just coming to Jonah and saying, listen, go to Nineveh, preach to them, call them to repent, go. And Jonah says, no. He gets on a boat and goes the opposite direction. If you want to read it, it's that clear. I mean, it happens that fast. The book starts with go. He says no. He goes the other direction. Goes to a place called Tarshish but he doesn't go. He doesn't really get there. He gets on the boat, and God sends a storm. And the crazy thing is he's gone down to the bottom of the boat, and he's asleep when the storm hits. The crew is thinking, we're all going to die. Why is this happening to us? And they find a dude asleep in the lowest part of the boat, and they say, wake up and start praying. We're all about to die. And by the way, who are you? Why is this happening to us? And he says, well, I'm probably the reason this is happening because I'm running from God. And then he tells them, you are going to have to throw me over into the water. And they're freaked out because they're thinking, we're probably going to die if we don't throw this man over because he's running from God and he just told us we have to. But it seems like God would kill us for throwing somebody over. So there's just like nothing good for them to do here. But they do it, and when they throw Jonah in the water, the sea goes calm. So they're like, well, I guess we did the right thing. Unless there's a delay. Then Jonah is swallowed by this great fish, and he cries out in a prayer. And I'm not going to read the whole prayer to you, just part of it. Chapter 2, verse 7 says this, when my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you in your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay you. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon dry land. That's what it says. It vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Here, we start with the second try. I mean, immediately. Jonah is vomited onto dry land. Chapter 3 begins, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, the message that I tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them, including the king. They took serious the warning of God that came through Jonah. And you'd think at this point the story would end. Jonah finally did what God said to do. The people responded in a good way. So in preaching, that would be a success, that he was a successful preacher that day. But he is not. Jonah is not happy, and the story does not end. Jonah is, in fact, furious. He is angry. This is what it says about Jonah. It displeased Jonah exceedingly. We don't use the word displeased or angry. He was displeased. No. And he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, and let's listen to this. O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? Jonah is saying to God right now, when I was still in Israel, before I ever heard you say to go to Nineveh, or when you did say to me, go to Nineveh, this is why I didn't go the first time. This is why I got on the ship and went the opposite direction. Because I knew this could happen. That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. This is an Old Testament prophet. Too often we get the idea that God was different in the Old Testament, that somehow he was more angry and vengeful and cruel. And you know what a prophet that really knows him says? I didn't want to go warn these people. I didn't want to give them a chance to repent because I knew what you were like, God. I knew that you are gracious and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. I knew it, and I knew you might pardon them. And I didn't want to have any part of it. Wow. What does God say to him? Is it right for you to be this angry? Is it right for you to feel this way, Jonah? Talk about a man and God having an honest conversation. God just looking at him and saying, do you have the right attitude about this? Jonah, is this okay? Jonah's response, he's already a one-day's journey into the city. He walks, I guess, a day out. He spends the day walking out of the city and sits out in the middle of nowhere, has to build what he calls a booth or something to shelter himself from the sun. And there God helps him, and it says that he grows a plant over him to shade him from the sun. A day later, God sends a worm that eats the plant, and the shade is gone. And again, Jonah says, I am so angry, I would rather die. Again, he says this to God. I am so angry, I would rather die. And again, God asks him, Jonah, should you be this angry? And then he goes and he says this, Jonah, there are 120,000 people in that city that do not know their right hand from their left hand. They have no way of knowing me. Is it okay for me to care about them? And he's essentially saying to Jonah, Jonah, do you care more about whether you get a sunburn because this plant's gone? Is it okay for me to care about 120,000 souls that you don't seem to care about? He really puts that to Jonah. Listen to Jonah. When the plant dies and he's angry enough to die again, God says to him, do you do well to be angry for the plant? And he said, yes, I do. Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. He's talking to God. I mean, that's like crazy. I don't know if sometimes you read the Bible and you're just reading it because you should, and you just, if you ever read it and you don't even remember where you left off the day before, that should be a spot where you remember. I remember yesterday, he told God, I mean, that's like me telling McLaren, like, are you going to ever speak to your mother again that way? Yes, I am. What? It's the same thing. God says, is the plant really that big of a deal, Jonah? Yes, it is. Big enough to make me want to die. I'd rather die. And that's when God has to go. 120,000 souls at stake, and we're talking about a plant, Jonah. So this is where we stop and go, how did Jonah ever get here? How did he ever get here? And isn't it, Jonah, are you losing? Are you a little crazy to think this way? And those would be fair questions. I think it's fair for us to ask those questions. But if it's possible for him, we'd be wise to think it's possible for us. If there's some insanity in him like that, could it also exist in us? What we find is that for Jonah, there was a hidden idol. There was, remember how we were talking about how in our culture there's norms? There's norms like, well, yeah, I mean, when you graduate from college, you look for a job, and whichever one pays the most, probably take that one. And then for my friend Chumbo, cultural norm for him was, he was supposed to go get a PhD. I was supposed to go get a bachelor's. Big difference, but there were these things that were just normal for us. There's also a lot of these norms that there's nothing wrong with them. For example, for Jonah, I think it really was that he loved his country, and that's a good thing. But what had happened for him here is he let it become more than just a normal affection, a normal appreciation of being an Israelite. It had become something bigger than that. See, what was happening with Jonah is that he was asked to go to Nineveh. And Nineveh was the single greatest threat to the success and future of Israel. They were a large city and a dangerous city, and they had even threatened, many believe they had threatened Israel with the equivalent of taxes. Like, listen, we won't crush you, we won't attack you, we won't take you if you pay us. So when God comes to Jonah and says, go preach to them, go minister to them, Jonah is like, no way, I'm going the opposite way. He won't dare do it, because what Nineveh represents to him is the greatest threat to the thing closest to his heart. Nineveh is the greatest threat to the thing closest to his heart. Nineveh is the greatest threat to the hidden idol in his life. Nineveh is the greatest threat to his counterfeit God. You watch when he prays, when he's in the fish and he realizes his life is fainting away. When he comes to his senses, he says, those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. I think he's saying this of Nineveh, but on some level he's got to be realizing this is true for himself. When he puts his love for his country, again, which can be a good thing, at such a high level, it's more dear to him than anything else, he is making it a vain idol. So much so that he's forfeiting the grace of God in his own life and then therefore to others. When we have hidden idols in our life, it blinds us. And it ends up preventing the grace of God to work in our own life, and therefore to be able to work through us in the life of others. And what happens is we have inferiorities, we have fears, we have inadequacies, and we spend our whole life trying to make up for those things. And some of the things that exist in our culture become a way for us to fill those voids, to take care of those needs. You could say it that way. For Jonah, it was a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, was provided in him being an Israelite. And when God asks him to go love Nineveh, he's asking him to go love that very thing that is the greatest threat to what's dearest to his heart. And what had become more important than it ever should have become. So when we look at Jonah, we got to go, Jonah, what's wrong here? And we see it, but we need to begin to ask, could that kind of thing exist in my life? Something that I would be blind to. See, at this point, you're probably like, Jonah's crazy. I don't see myself having anything like that. I mean, he's telling God He's talking back to God. I'm not talking back to God. I don't seem to have any obsession that's making me crazy. But that's kind of the point. It's a hidden idol. You don't realize it until you have to go to Nineveh. So maybe we need to ask, what's our Nineveh? Who's that one person that you can talk all about the grace of God, the forgiveness of God, and the love of God, but God could go, and then you're like, oh no, not them. Or for this people group, oh God, okay. Right? What could God put his finger on in our life that we would then go, nah, that's a little different. Or we might even say, I don't have grace for that person, which wouldn't make any sense. It's almost like saying, that's unforgivable. That's a phrase, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, forgiveness is forgiving when somebody isn't necessarily forgivable. Grace is grace when it's not deserved. And so we have to begin to go, okay, God, maybe that exists in my life. A few examples to kind of help you understand more about us, more about what it means to be human. We tend to think we got everything all right. And it's always easier to see where somebody else doesn't have it right. Like Jonah. Jonah, what is wrong here? You know what? I think it ended up all right, but the book doesn't end well. It ends with God going, do you care more about a plant than you do about 120,000 people? End of book. That's crazy. But somebody had to tell us this story, and only one person knew it, because it was Jonah's story. He told the story. He came around, but that meant that he had to come to the point where he realized he didn't have these things right. That this hidden idol was destroying him, so much so that he couldn't show the love of God to other people. He'd freak out about a plant giving him shade more than he would about the needs of other people. That's wild. That's where Jonah was. I spent a good part of this week going, what's my Nineveh? What would be your Nineveh? Maybe as a group, what's our Nineveh? Because again, as a group, you can have certain things you don't like or you do like. Madison gave me this one article written by a guy named Scott Alexander who writes frequently on social issues. This guy is a prolific writer. Madison gave me a 20-page article. A blogger wrote a 20-page article. And the guy's just like downloading information off his mind. But he made incredible points. And he said, of all the things he's written on, and much of it being controversial, he never got a greater response than when he wrote on the death of Osama bin Laden. When Osama bin Laden died, he wrote about it, and he said he was careful not to really, he said, all I did was, in some way, I said, I'm glad we were at the point where we could finally move on. And we took care of this guy. He said he got more hate mail about that than anything he's ever written on. And most of it went something like this. How dare you celebrate the death of another human being, no matter who? How dare you basically dance in the grave of anybody? How dare you do that? And he was, I think, a little bit surprised that he got more response from that than anybody else. But then what grabbed him was that a few years later, Margaret Thatcher died. Picture of Margaret. If you don't know who Margaret is, she was pretty much the equivalent of Ronald Reagan. She served in England from 1979 to 1990. She's the only female prime minister in their history. Politically, she was pretty well aligned with Ronald Reagan. She actually did his eulogy. When she died, on this blogger's page, this same group that had ridiculed him like crazy for even really talking about the death of Osama bin Laden, they began posting things on like, ding dong, witch is dead, and celebrating that she had died. That doesn't make sense. It's not really logical at all. I mean, basically, they weren't living up, even in the slightest way, to their own principle. Their principle with bin Laden had been like, it doesn't matter who, it's a person, you don't celebrate their death. And that would even be biblical, wouldn't it? That the Bible says that we don't celebrate the death of another. But how did they then turn around and celebrate her death? It's because in some way she represented Nineveh for them. She represented everything, or she represented a threat to that which they loved the most. And what this story is just another reference to, like, we as humans can be way more like Jonah than we realize. There can be things in our life that skew our viewpoint, things that can skew how we even think if we're not careful. This same guy, Scott Alexander, in his blog also cites the story in that same article, cites the story of The Father Brown Mysteries by G.K. Chesterton. Anybody a fan? Read that? Okay, a few of you. There's one called The Secret of Father Brown, and in that story, it tells a story about two brothers. One is a nobleman, one is the deadbeat brother who never did anything with his life. They get in a fight and they decide to resolve the fight with a duel. The nobleman kills the younger brother, and the nobleman flees their hometown where they grew up. 30 years later, he comes back. 30 years later. When he gets back, the town celebrates his return and is happy to forgive him. The priest is a little bit slower to forgive him. He says, you know what? You killed a man. Forgiveness is possible here, but there must be remorse and there must be penance. But time goes by, and the community finds out that the nobleman had not actually killed the younger brother. The younger brother had actually killed the nobleman and stolen his identity and buried himself, essentially, and left with the nobleman's identity and came back here 30 years later. When the town figures out, okay, it's a mystery, remember, this isn't a true story. It's fictional. How did that happen? It's fictional. It's a mystery. When the town finds out that really that no good for nothing brother did this and killed the older brother, they start demanding that they hang this guy, that they burn him alive. And they go to the priest, and the priest says, well, he did kill somebody, but there is forgiveness as long as there's remorse and as long as there's penance. You see that the priest was exactly the same for both people? It's because he had his mind on God and not the people. If we have our mind and our heart and our love set on something other than God, we can fall prey to a hidden idol. We can set our affections on something else, and there can be things even in our culture that we would adhere to, that we would hold on to. It would shore up our inadequacies. It would make us feel like somebody. And so the way we deal with the hidden idols in our life, the potential of them, is that we come and we get our mind on God. I could just say it that simply. I feel like some of these things have been big picture. I've talked about Osama bin Laden and Margaret Thatcher and G.K. Chesterton's mystery. But I want to end tonight, and worship team, you can go ahead and come back. I want to end tonight by just bringing it home. As I've gone through this week, and I've started to even ask myself, what are those hidden idols? Do they exist in my own life? I've found them not on great, grand scales. I've found them in normal stuff. And I've found them even in small situations. Sports, for example. Y'all think I'm nice but I fooled you all. I really have. I remember when I was still in school one time, coming back from an intramural soccer game, and actually taking a marker and writing in my cleats, like on the insole, behave. Don't do something stupid out there. And what it was is, okay, so even now I still get to play, thanks to Sid Rich. I get to play soccer with them, get to play college soccer in the spring. So last year I'm playing, and this one guy does this thing to me that I've hated, always hated, even since high school. And it's when, okay, a corner kick is coming across, and you're on offense, and you're trying to position yourself so that you can head the ball into the back of the goal. You get the picture? So I'm waiting for the ball to come, and I start trying to get position, and the guy starts playing me instead of the ball. You know? He starts acting like he doesn't know where the ball is, and so he's just getting in my path and leaning all over me, and so that I can't get past him. And immediately I go back to high school instinct. And for some reason, whenever I did it in high school, I never got caught. I pretty much body slammed people doing this. As soon as it happened in high school, I would just grab a lot of shirt and go like that as hard as I could and drop them. I think what it was is that, for one thing I learned this, you have a lot of leverage. Next time you play basketball or whatever, soccer, you should try it. Just grab the shirt and pull. It won't be a hidden idol for you, it'll just be an experiment. But I just grabbed the shirt on this guy, poor guy from Martell. And I just went, I was just going to remove him. I was going to get the position I wanted, and his shirt just gave way. It was just like, thankfully he was shocked. I could tell at first he was kind of like, dude, and then he chilled, thankfully. And you know, all it taught me is I had to walk away from that and go like, what's wrong with me? Like, I'm almost 40 and I almost took out this 18-year-old. Seriously. And you're like, and you know what it is? I sure would like to score a goal. I'd feel good about myself. And everybody else would like me. Do you find that anywhere in your heart? Like, something you do, something you succeed at, that if it was threatened, like I'm going to get this goal, that ball's about to come in here, and all of a sudden this guy starts doing that one thing that's going to stop me. And I'm like, I'm going to remove you. And I told myself I would never do that. Why? Because hidden in my heart there's these. See what I'm saying? Some of them is just situational. It's just like, I find meaning from stuff other than Jesus. I'm not so at peace and so at rest in Jesus that I don't pull whatever else I can into my life to shore up my inadequacies. Do you get that? Like, what is it about career? What is it about what you're good at? What is it about your relationships that you do use it more than you realize to make you feel like you're okay? And if it was threatened, how crazy would you get? What's your net? And so the answer for us, like the answer is for all of these, is we have to come back to Christ and say, my identity is not in my love of the country. My identity is not in whether I score goals. My identity is not in how much money I make. My identity is in Christ. In Matthew, Jesus Christ calls himself the true Jonah. The true Jonah. And then he goes on to say, Jonah who was in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And he's comparing it to himself, who would be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Jesus who died and rose again for us. When Jonah was thrown into the storm, you know what happened? The water became calm. Jesus is the one thrown into the storm for us. In the crazy world that we live in our crazy lives, he is the one whose life was thrown into the storm. He brought peace. When we get that our real peace is in him and through him, we can let go of idols. We don't have to be wrapped up and taken up by cultural norms that would tell us that I'm going to be defined by how much money I make. We can break free from those things. And like Jonah, we can come to this place where we realize, you know what, if I take hold of those things, they will blind me and they will keep me from God's grace. So I let go because he's in there. He is my peace. He is my life. He is my identity. And you won't win this battle in one day. Because I got another soccer game to play. I'll have to go back and go, what? I keep my mind on Jesus. He is my peace. He is my satisfaction. Every day, you'll have more challenges and more counterfeit gods rise up in your life. And the way you defeat them is you go to Jesus and you say, you're the greatest treasure I have ever found. And you develop habits in life that help you value that so consistently that you see idols for what they are. And you don't let them define you, and they don't make you crazy. You don't make a bigger deal over a plant than you do over a soul.